Our next speaker is Errol Drummond, Head of Education at Aleo. He's going to discuss the important considerations that we need to make as we build out Web3 infrastructure. Privacy preservation affects all of us, but does fighting for this right make sense, or is it a recipe for disaster?
Thank you very much. Is this the clicker? Okay. Nice to see you guys. My name's Errol, and I've been doing zero knowledge and privacy-related topics for the past few years. I'm a representative of Aleo, which is a privacy-focused layer one. And this is why it's really nice to be in front of you guys, because as we build out privacy technology and a privacy ecosystem, our task is to kind of convince and show entrepreneurs what they can build with our technology and why it has value. So in light of that, I'm just kind of here to discuss the topic of privacy and show you some business ideas and use cases of like how it's novel and how you can derive real-world value that's not been possible before. There's three main takeaways I want you to have from this talk. The first is like the discussion of what is privacy, why do we care, and what's really going on there that's new that people care about. The second is to deal with some worries about whether privacy is dangerous or not. So this is an important discussion point and a worry that many people have. And lastly, I just want to touch on a kind of philosophical basis to think about privacy as a framework. Privacy is a massive topic, and it's been getting a lot more attention the past few decades as the digital realm evolved, but specifically it's more unique. So diving into the first part, what are we actually discussing about in terms of privacy, and what does zero knowledge contribute that is so unique compared to other places? The way I'll do this part is I'll kind of talk about an idea that zero knowledge technology can achieve, and then I'll show you a use case or an example about how it's used. So the first one is the kind of generic privacy stuff, which is when you use a normal web service, the cost of entry is your data, right? You give up your data and you can use their service, or you don't give up your data and you kind of miss out on, nowadays, an integral part of society. Like using Google Maps is kind of extremely valuable, and if you don't have it, life is a bit harder. But there's no reason why it has to be this way. There are other business models that can be exploited, but the game theory between users and service providers just didn't work out that way. So what zero knowledge can do, the first thing which was discussed a bit in the panel, is for private payments. When we made blockchains in the beginning, zero knowledge technology wasn't practical, and so we thought pseudonymity was going to be enough. If people didn't know that this is your account, then you'd be safe. But it turns out that that's not as safe as possible. So mass scraping is kind of a problem waiting to happen. Many of you probably remember Cambridge Analytica, which is this big company that did what it could to influence elections around the world. And what they did in America, they gave out psychometric surveys to 270,000 people. They gave them each $1 or $2, a really cheap way to try and thwart democracy. From these tests, they tried to determine personality types. And then they correlated that with the way they interacted with content on Facebook. They then got as much data as possible from everybody in America on Facebook and from other data providers, and they tried to go the other way and determine from the way they interacted with content what their personality type was. They then sent out targeted advertisements to try and influence the way they voted in elections. The only purpose of these adverts, it wasn't about informed decision making. It was, what do we tell this person with this personality type in order to make them vote the way we want them to. The adverts that they were sent could have been outright lies, they could have been inconsistent, but they only had that one focus. Now, if you take those models and then you also incorporate financial behavior, the way you spend your money, how often you get paid, what's your socioeconomic background, you're just making these models far stronger. And that seems like a reality that we don't want to be living in. And leaving all this data online publicly to be scraped like this just seems like a problem waiting to happen. There's no need to reveal this data these days. In earlier blockchains, they didn't incorporate zero knowledge from the bottom. And as a result, it's harder just to chuck it on top and get private payments. This is why they were saying before the scaling solutions for Ethereum, they're just scaling solutions, they're not privacy solutions. So private payments are the first topic. The second thing we can do with zero knowledge is something called membership attestation. This is where you can prove you're part of a group, but without revealing who you are. So for example, it could be all employees at Apple. You could prove that you work at Apple without saying who you are. You know, previously, in order to do this, you'd have to say, like, this is me, look, I gave a talk for Apple, or I'm emailing you from an email address from them. I'm from there. Likewise, it could be just members of this, attendees of this conference, that will be your group. It could be citizens of a nation. In order to make these groups, there's a kind of process to get on board, and depending on the group, the security of this is going to be different. Like, if it's attendees of this conference, you don't need a hardcore consensus mechanism. The people organizing the conference can probably be trusted to make this a fair one. But then after the conference, if you post online, you can make a proof that actually you did come here, and this is what you thought of this talk and stuff like this. So you can get evidence that the person who's making this comment does actually have the property that's relevant. So another example would be, if you're starting a new job and you're going to move across the country, or you're going to move to another country, you want to know as much as possible about the company you're going to go and work for. If you're going to go and join Apple, then it's such a big company that, you know, it's kind of already known what it's like to be there. But if it's a smaller company, then internally it could have like immoral business practices. It could be, you know, technologically a terrible idea and all the employees are leaving. So you want to see stuff online and know what it's actually like to be there. If somebody works at their company and they feel this way, then they may vent to their friends and family, and they might post online as well, but they won't like give evidence that they actually work there, because the only evidence is like saying who they actually are or using that email address. And if you post online and complain about your company and tell them, like, this is me, then you're just putting yourself at risk. But instead you can do attestation, where you can prove that you work at this company without saying who you are, and then you're allowed to kind of vent and say your frustrations, or also the positive things as well. It's like a weird new social interaction method wherein you can prove that you're in this group without saying who you are. So this is sort of a new idea that we need to spend more time thinking about to see how to use it in creative ways. Other examples are like you can use it in voting, so you can prove that you're a citizen, or a member of a DAO, or whatever it may be. I'm going to skip this example in the interest of time, but in this one you can just prove that you have like at least 1 million followers on Twitter without doxing yourself. And then the last example I wanted to give is for, when we talk about privacy, there's kind of two main types, data privacy and functional privacy. I didn't really touch on zero-knowledge proofs or how they work. I was assuming some form of background knowledge. But just quickly, it's some bit of data that you filled out some computation correctly. The computation could be a transaction, it could be a smart contract call, it could be running an algorithm. And by filling it out in a valid way, it means that if you send one Ethereum, or whatever token it is, then your account has to go down by the exact same amount. You can't fake the computation. So data privacy would be that in the transaction scenario, all the data is invisible. All the values going through wires is invisible. We don't know what public address it came from. We don't know what public address it was sent to. We don't know what was sent or how much was sent. But then there's functional privacy as well, and this is where you don't know what computation happened. You don't know whether it's a transaction. You don't know whether it's a smart contract call. You don't know whether it's the running of an algorithm. It's just something happened. Originally at Aleo, we based it off a paper called ZEXI, Zero-Knowledge Execution, and this achieved both data and functional privacy. So in that scenario with that kind of blockchain, the only thing you see on chain is that something happened. You don't know if it was a transaction. You don't know if it was calling a function. You don't know if it was updating a Merkle tree. You literally had no idea. Unfortunately, in practice, this turned out to be too slow. Zero-knowledge technology is still kind of new, and in order to achieve that, you had to do recursive proofs where you made a proof about a proof. So we had to remove the functional privacy aspect, but in the next few years, it's going to become fast enough that we can incorporate it again. And I'm also just here to show you the ideas we're speaking about in privacy, not specifically just Aleo. So an example of what you could do with this would be a kind of ZK algorithm, which is if you train a model on a proprietary data set, healthcare data, financial data, whatever it is, and you don't just want to kind of sell the algorithm, you can now provide this as a service. People give you their data they want run. You can give them the result of the processing and a proof that you did it in a valid way. Right? So you can remove some form of trust from business settings because there'll be certainty that the computation was carried out in the right way. One other thing that's relevant there that I didn't mention is for functional privacy, I said that you don't know what function was run. So if it's an algorithm, you don't know any details about it, but you can confirm that it is the same algorithm advertised online. They'll like give an example of their algorithm and say this is what it achieves, and here's its like key. And then later on when they use it, you'll be certain that it was the same algorithm, but you won't know how it worked. So a couple kind of concluding remarks in this first section is that privacy is now built in. Previously, when web services were created, they had to build additional infrastructure to look after your privacy. And that was a huge engineering challenge and an operation task that was hard to do. But in private blockchains, privacy is built in. So web services have to build additional structure and infrastructure to take away your privacy. So this hugely changes the game dynamics in terms of whether you're going to achieve privacy or not. Businesses will have to put in more work to take away your privacy, which means that it's not really in their interest to do so. So this helps strengthen us a lot. It also makes it easier for businesses having everything secured more effectively on chain, and then they need less worries about security operations. And then finally, one thing I mentioned at the beginning, zero-knowledge technology was, it didn't exist, and then in 1989 we discovered the first system, but then only a few years ago it became practically feasible to make use of it in the real world. But because of that, and this weird social nature in that, this asymmetric dynamic where you can prove something without giving it away, we haven't spent long, and we haven't had many smart people figuring out how to use that in a valuable way. So now the task of everybody who's building with zero-knowledge technology, not just for private payments, but for general applications, is getting smart people and entrepreneurs to be creative and see how they can derive value with these new tools. So that's the task of all these kind of privacy layer 1 blockchains. And this is also why we're here in Israel. We're spending more time coming here. Our CEO was here at the last conference a few months ago, and we're going to be spending more time over the coming years. Then I want to move on to part 2 and just kind of allay some fears about whether privacy is dangerous or not. Because I had this as well. When I was working with this stuff, I was kind of worried that we were building infrastructure that was going to be used in more bad ways than it was good. And then when I kind of researched and investigated, it seems like that's not actually the case. And I want to give you 2 main arguments for why that's the case. The first is that any of these nefarious entities that need privacy for what they want to achieve, they already have several other paths available for them to achieve it. We're not providing them something new, we're just giving them a new way to do it, but it's still something they can achieve anyway. For example, if a nation wants to destabilize a foreign democracy, then one thing they can do is start funding extremist political organizations or also extremist individuals. And if they do that, they want deniability. They want to say, it's not us. And they can already do this. They already are doing this. They send out cash. They can use obscure financial networks of shell companies. And it's kind of hard to investigate. So there's already tools available to these nefarious actors to achieve these kind of things, including for avoiding sanctions. The other example would be tax evasion. This is where you're supposed to pay tax, but you just don't in an illegal way. But if you want to not pay tax as an individual or an organization, there's already several legal loopholes available to you. You can set up a company on a small island, and that company leases out its intellectual property in such a way that all the profits accrue on this tiny island that has no tax. And if you want to avoid, not pay tax, and you can do it in a legal way or an illegal way, it doesn't make much sense to take the risk of doing it in an illegal way when you can do it in a legal way. And then a follow-on argument is that a lot of the tools used to investigate these problems aren't blunted by privacy-preserving blockchains. Security operations, like when you have an entire organization working together, there's just loads of attack vectors because humans make mistakes and we're not like computers that you can just download every bit of information they need. In the way we interact with stuff, those are the places where these tools are used to investigate, and you kind of put malware on people's computer and see the things they're doing. If you saw the talk before the panel, this is what she's speaking about as well, that there's lots of other tools available, and it's mostly that stuff that's used to investigate. And the use of a private blockchain here doesn't really dull those effects too much. So these tools are still available. And privacy-preserving stuff is more about the protection of the individual and society at large. So Kurt Opsahl is somebody who's been doing privacy-related things for a long time, and he gave a speech at the closing ceremony of DevCon Bogota this year. And this was one of the lines that really stood out to me, is that what privacy-enhancing tools most protect you against is suspicionless activity. You know, if every time you leave your house, a drone just follows you around and films you, just because you're outside in a public setting, it would feel like an invasion of privacy. But in the online setting, we've just been accustomed to like everything we do, all our online behavior being recorded and used. We're only sort of okay with it because we got used to it. But there's no reason why it should stay that way. It feels like we should have protection of our online behavior as well. And then to regulatory compliance, using private blockchains, you can still build regulatory compliant things on blockchains, and you can also still do this in like a way that's more scalable and easier to do. If you want to build a stock exchange on a private blockchain, then you'll have to give up some privacy, you know, to do KYC regulation and this kind of stuff. But that's okay. You can do that very easily on top of private blockchains anyway. And the users of your services will kind of understand that if I want to buy and trade stocks, I have to give up some privacy. That's a fair thing because smart regulators have decided that's a good way to structure in our society. There's nothing about private blockchains that prevent them from being regulatory compliant. In many ways, they can interact with them more effectively. There's still a discussion to be had about what this regulation should look like because we don't have much crypto-specific regulation come out yet, and also in particular like private crypto regulation. This is a huge discussion that's going to be unfolding over the next few years. And so the more informed and aware we can be about the things that are relevant, the better this conversation should go. And then I want to move to like a last point, which is a philosophical basis of how we think about privacy in a kind of framework. Because when you make regulation, you kind of have an idea in mind about what seems right and what doesn't seem right. And this is usually at some form of philosophical basis where you decide, like, this is what we should have in society, and this is maybe morally wrong, and we shouldn't have it. In the Western world, we've had this Lockean and Kantian idea of individual right to privacy has been the most prevalent. This is where you're entitled to your privacy until you share it. Until you share it in a public setting, you have the right to privacy. This seems very good, and it is in most cases, but occasionally it falls down because of the way it works out in the legal setting is that when there's a privacy violation, the question that is asked is, was the thing you did in a public setting? Now, there are several scenarios, generic scenarios, where that's not the case, and I'm going to show you them now. The other idea that might work better is from a legal scholar called Ari, and it's this idea that privacy and trust are essentially the same thing. Privacy and trust are necessary structural components of complex human interaction, that if you want to do certain behaviors within the real world, you need trust to be there in order to be safe doing it and to actually go about doing it. A key example here is the gay community, because gay communities are public settings. They have gay bars, they have gay neighborhoods, they have various public settings in which they're gay, but they're largely built on trust. You're allowed to be gay in the gays community, but not have anybody outside know. Lots of people where they're from, they're going to have a lot of personal issues if their friends and family know that they're gay. But they want to go to this public setting that's a trusted setting. So a key example is in the 1970s, there was an assassination attempt on the American president, Ford. This woman fired a revolver. She missed. Before she got off a second shot, this guy tackled her. This guy, his name was Oliver Sipple, and he was gay. He was in the San Franciscan gay community. And when the newspapers were investigating, of course, they want to look into it and they want a story. And they spoke to one of his friends, and his friends outed him to the press. His friend wasn't trying to be malicious or mean. At that time, the world had a very negative view of the gay community, and his friend wanted the world to see that gay people could be heroes as well. So the newspapers outed him in public, and his family found out, and his family disowned him. Okay, it was a really negative outcome from being outed. And when he took the newspapers to court and said, you violated my privacy, you shouldn't have shared that, the judges ruled against him in the favor of the newspapers for the reason that he was gay in public settings. He went to gay bars, public setting. He went to gay neighborhoods. He went to gay parades. He did things in very public ways in public settings. it seems like morally, if you out somebody as gay in public and you really negatively impact their life like that, such their family disown them, it seems like a moral wrong. So the question of whether it was a public setting or not seems like the wrong question. Seems like maybe we should discuss whether it's a trusted setting or not. A similar idea is in technology. When you discover a new technology, there's some really funny examples where some people, I think, made some GPS technology and they wanted to test it out on their friend's car. And if you invent something or discover something, you're kind of proud and you want to share it with your friends. So they tried it on their friend's car, and then they went to file a patent application. And you're not allowed to file a patent if you've made a technology and then publicly shared it. So they denied their patent applications, and the reasoning was that in the setting with their friends, more specifically, they didn't ask their friends to sign confidentiality agreements. And that's the main reason why it was considered a public setting rather than a private setting. But I mean, if you invent a technology, you're proud, you want to show your friends, you want to test it a little bit, you're doing it with your friends in a trusted setting because you trust them not to share it outside of this setting. And it just seems like a weird, awkward thing to do, that if you tell your friends, hey, I did this, by the way, before I show you, can you sign this confidentiality agreement? It's just social awkwardness and not realistic to expect that in the real world. So again, the question of whether it's a public setting seems to be the wrong question, and it's more whether it was a trusted setting or not. And as we try and build this crypto-specific regulation, this is going to be an important idea to keep in mind of what do we actually want to see in the world, and what philosophical ideas do we have about when we should maintain our privacy or not. And one of the nice things about zero-knowledge technology is that by incorporating it from the base layer, building from the ground up with zero knowledge at the center and having private transactions and potentially functional privacy as well, you can ensure you maintain privacy everywhere except where people agree that they shouldn't have privacy, whether it be KYC regulation or something else. And like I said, there's going to be discussion for years, and we need to work with regulators to make this happen. Finally, just a little bit about Aleo. It's private by default, smart contract enabled, layer 1 blockchain, and it's not a ZK EVM. ZK EVM is a really badly named thing because they use zero-knowledge technology, but they only use the scalability property of it and not the zero-knowledge property, which it seems like the wrong way around to do it. So those things aren't private, they're just scalable. This is an actual ZK VM where it does have data privacy and has the scalability property as well. So we raised $200 million in the Series B a while back, and we've just been building out the ecosystem and the technology. We've gone to testnet 2 and testnet 3, and we're almost ready for mainnet and to have actual developers start using our stuff to build their final things. And just lastly, me and the community in Istanbul are setting up a conference there as well. If you're interested in penetrating that market as well, because Turkish ecosystem has a lot of use of crypto, please let me know and we can discuss as well. So thank you. I hope you learned a few things about privacy.